What is up, everybody? I have a big interview today. I'm here with the CEO of Quid. Michael Bramlage is here with me today. What an honor to have you on, man. Really wanted to discuss, what Quid is, learn more about different levels of ownership, what first appearance really means, and really just, do a deep dive into a lot of these important topics that are surrounding the digital collectible community right now. So, how are you? Thanks for coming.
I'm doing really well. Thank you for having me. This is kind of like a long time coming. I'm really glad we can finally make it work.
Same here. I know I know you're a busy guy, and I've been quite a busy as well in the last few
Yeah.
months. So I'm glad that we finally got together and can make this happen, man. So yeah, maybe I'll just jump into it because I know you don't have a lot of time. So I want to make sure that we can kind of get to the most important questions. So before we do that, maybe we can just kind of share a little bit more about Quid and what it is.
Yeah, you bet. So Quid is one of the oldest digital collectibles marketplaces around. We've been doing digital collectibles really since 2015. I think we sold our first item May 4th or 5th of 2016. So we predate NFTs. Let's just say I've been telling people about digital trading cards, digital figures, digital collectibles for years at like dinner parties or meeting friends, and they're like, that's the stupidest thing ever, right? So we were definitely doing it before anyone thought it was fashionable, before NFTs and before the space blew up. So I think probably what we're best known for is just having been terribly early, and then having, being early, but also having a lot of brands available to collect
Hmm.
on the marketplace, whether it's Rick and Morty, Game of Thrones. There's even Disney there. There's even some NBA there, right? So we're kind of known for having a really vast assortment of collections and brands, and having just been like ridiculously early. Again, when like the phrase digital collectibles was like laughed at. Uh, and now like to hear you and other great content creators like use the term digital collectibles and like debate like, is it digital collectible or is it an NFT? Like I'm like, I got like laughed at 5 years ago just using that term. So it's really rewarding to even be here with you guys.
No, that's amazing, man. Great synopsis there. And I guess from that, we have this digital collectible versus NFT versus first on the blockchain. And so there's just so much going on within the space. And I feel like unless you're really like a blockchain engineer or you understand this stuff really
Yeah,
significantly, it's really hard to, I guess, decipher,
yeah,
what the value is, right? Because some things are digital collectibles that are on a website. Others are digital collectibles that have tracking identification to that collectible on the blockchain. Others are like CryptoPunks are
yeah.
completely off of like or on the blockchain there. So maybe you can kind of discuss a little bit about those levels of ownership and what maybe that really means.
Yeah, yeah. And let me do it first through like the context of our experience with the blockchain, because as I said, like we
Yeah.
predate, right? So um oh gosh, we since we started so early at Quid, like in 2016, and did a bunch of licensing deals, Star Trek, Game of Thrones, Disney, Rick and Morty, a bunch of other ones, and just have this like vast assortment to collect in the marketplace. And again, just being around for so long to get millions of collectors to start building their digital collections, we've had the good fortune of like seeing a lot of stuff in our data and sort of using that to make decisions. And one thing that happened was um, early in like 2018, we kind of realized like, hey, this is a lot more rewarding if people can cash out, right? Like you shouldn't
Mm.
just buy and sell and like only use your proceeds to buy the next thing, right? You should have the ability to be able to take money out of the system, make a withdrawal, and use that money to take your partner to a nice dinner or buy a pair of jeans you've wanted, right?
Yeah.
And always our sense of like what you should cash out, it was never like cash out to buy a house, right? Or cash out to buy a Lambo, right? Because this was prior to like NFTs blowing up. It was always like, yeah, like just like in the physical world, you can sell something on eBay and get your money and go buy a piece of pizza. You should have that same ability in Quid. So we added that a couple of years ago, and we started to see the price points of our digital collectibles trade at pretty reasonable prices, hundreds of dollars, some at thousands of dollars.
Wow.
And we started to get worried because we're like, not only did we suspect before building our cash economy that our collectors really value these objects, now we could value them not just on like floor price, which is kind of meaningless,
Mm.
but we could value them on what similar items we're actually trading for. And like literally, what is the market willing to pay somebody else in hundreds of dollars or thousands of dollars for this item? And we began to think like, that's really, those are strong signals that these are valuable, right? And we're like, well, what do we do now? Like, it is kind of a burden to say, like, we've got collectors who have collections based on real data could trade for hundreds of thousands of dollars. And we're like, that's like scary, right? Because like that's on a server, right? Hosted in a data center from Amazon in Kentucky, right? And so our sort of entry into the blockchain was almost out of this fear and panic of being a custodian for our collectors' collections that were like legitimately being valued and are being valued at hundreds, if not thousands or tens of thousands of dollars. And so it became like, how do we build a system where like we can't accidentally unplug our server and they disappear, right?
Yeah.
And it was like, well, what do we do? And like that's where the blockchain comes in, right? Is this like this place? Think of it as a storage location, a place to store your collectibles that just are like safer, right? That are more protected. Someone can't come in and like mess with it. Right. And so our entry really into blockchain and NFTs was out of having this real consumer problem of our existing collector community valuing these items in non-trivial USD dollar amounts, and then being like, we got to give them the equivalent of like a safety deposit box, right? We've got to sort of think of their digital collection as you or I might have like baseball cards or comic books, right? 90% of what you own is okay to be stored in a binder or in a box or in your closet. But 10%, 5%, 1%, the super valuable stuff in the physical collectibles world, what do? You ship it off to get graded, you get it slabbed, you insure it. And if it's really valuable, you probably don't store it in your garage, right? You might store it off premise in a safety deposit box or in a professional vault. So for us, we had this really organic entry into NFTs where our collectors were already buying and selling digital collectibles for growing amounts of money. But then it was like, well, how can we offer them a service where it's the equivalent of moving their high value inventory to a safety deposit box? And that's, I think, a really strong metaphor, maybe less for the degens who come into digital collectibles from NFTs and PFPs and token trading, but it's a really powerful metaphor for those that have come into digital collectibles because they're physical collectors, right? And they understand the physical collecting. So that's the metaphor we like to use. And that's how I think we can all make sense of some of the technical complexities of blockchain, right? So for us, the blockchain is key, and like true digital ownership is key, because what it should deliver to the collector is this sense of like, no one can mess with it, right? It's truly mine, right? And all of it is mine. And the company that initially sold it to me, they can go poof one day, but it's still mine, right? In the same way, you probably bought a baseball card in 1992 from a company that's no longer in existence. And because they went out of business doesn't mean you also lost your card, right? We need to create that same true digital ownership, that same sense of permanence, that same sense of security with digital collectibles, if for no reason only that people are spending real amounts of money on this, right? And they're spending real amounts of money with this notion that I'll have this for 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, right? So that's why we've always taken kind of a technical approach to the blockchain, in the sense of like, how guaranteed is it that you can have this for 30 years? Because we know people are spending money on pretext that they'll have it for 30 years, right? Or at least that's what we hope, right? That's more the long-term collector as investor, as opposed to like the flipper. And that's the interesting thing about this space, which is you kind of know who the flippers are, because they don't care if they can have it for 30 years or 20 years. They don't care if they read the fine print, and it might not all be on the blockchain. But anyway, that's our story as to how we have gotten into it, which we think is very, very organic. We certainly didn't rush into NFTs. We certainly didn't like hop into the craze. We actually came to the technology because it was the best solution for a growing use case we had, which is like, oh crap, like these are really, really valuable in an off-chain setting. And like, what is the solution we can give to them that has even more confidence and security and permanence than what our own servers could provide? So does that make sense?
I love that, man. And I love how much more layered it is than people originally anticipate as well. Because a lot of people right now, as you may know from some of the trends, is like, was it first to the blockchain? You know, that's and that I think stem from the historical significance of like first appearances in comic books and things like that. But I know you and I were talking before the show, and we're saying that that's maybe an element to it, but I think that thing almost has like taken off too much, because if that's the case, then really we're in the golden era right now, and then anything that precedes this afterwards is not going to be valuable. So I think maybe you can also help kind of clear that up, was this notion of like first appearance on the blockchain and what it
Yeah,
actually might mean. Yeah.
I think it's a characteristic of a digital collectible or an NFT that contributes to its value. But if it's the sole source of value, then I
Yeah.
think problematic. It's also problematic if pricing for objects that are deemed to be, FAs, if that gets overheated, that's also kind of problematic. I mean, by that same thesis, to extend it, it's like the next Spider-Man thing you do, or whatever DC does next with Superman as a comic book, like shouldn't the value for that plummet to basically nothing, right? Because
Right.
you know what I mean? So I just think the issue with FA and the blockchain is it can be debated, and but it certainly shouldn't be like the sole reason why something has demand, or why you want to own it. But actually, I'm okay that there isn't a definitive answer of what that means, because it creates debate between communities. I think that debate is healthy as long as it's respectful.
Right.
Um, but yeah, I think that's kind of how I would think about it, is like you can go through it like a lawyer would or an engineer would, and like totally break up what it means to be like on the blockchain, or like let alone like which blockchain matters, right?
Yeah.
Like if it's on like Flow, then it ain't on Ethereum, and it ain't really on OpenSea, right?
Yes.
So here's what I would say. I think it's healthy for the industry to be debating what that means, right? And I think it's good for collectors to always engage in that debate, right? But I also think like it's problematic if new collectors sort of ape into it, and they don't do their homework, they don't do their research, and they're buying because they believe like somebody else will want it because of
Mm.
the first appearance on the blockchain, right? Like,
Yes.
you know what I mean? Like that's the problem. It's like you should buy it because you want it. You should buy it because you personally view it as valuable. You shouldn't buy it because it has this label of FA on the blockchain,
Mm.
because someone else will value that down the line. I mean, this is the thing I don't get, is like VeVe takes some hits for this, but it's like, I always think which blockchain, right? Which blockchain is the definitive blockchain where it
Yeah.
really matters, right? And if you look, you can look at trading volumes. You can see Ethereum is the biggest, right? You can see Mutables up there in the top 5, but it's like maybe someday someone will wake up and be like, it matters if it's on Ethereum, and it doesn't matter if it's on Flow. So
Yeah.
there's so much that's like still open for debate. I think the debate is good, but I don't think it's good if you're buying just for FA on the blockchain, but you don't like do your homework,
Love that. I love that. It's like it's almost like too early
Right.
to, say that anything is objective at this point, like you said, where it's all still speculation for the most part. And this is interesting that I have got you on here, because I was going to ask as well, like, we talked about, like, let's say Superman #1 just being dropped on DC, which was an amazing, drop. Well, maybe not the actual drop experience, but in terms of what that NFT means. But we were just talking and saying, like, what happens, like you said, if they drop Superman #1 again, a second edition for the people that didn't get the first, and then in 20 years, maybe there's 26 NFT platforms that have all dropped Superman #1, and all the celebrities are in platform 13. So this
Right.
is where it gets just so complex, and
Yeah.
there's no kind of permanence to what it means, like long term, at least now, because we can't project that far into the future. But my question to you is, do you think that as we get more and more NFT platforms, more and more of this, physical items transferred into the digital realm, that we're going to see like all these NFTs across the board start to dilute in terms of price points, because we're essentially taking everything from the world and putting it into the digital realm? And so what does that mean? Like,
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let me go back real quick, then I'll answer the question. It's
yeah.
this whole debate of like FA on the blockchain, or FA as a digital collectible, or FA on which blockchain. It's sort of like saying like, for some reason the object is more valuable if it's stored in this bank versus that bank, right? And to be
Mm.
super clear about like blockchain or non-blockchain, um, like what if Quid had a fund that said we will be around for 100 years, and we have enough money to keep our servers running for 100 years. And as long as you keep your account active, right, and log in once a year, you can guarantee that anything we have in our servers will be around for 100 years. The reality is that might actually give you more safety and security and sense of permanence than some of these smaller, lesser known blockchains who
True.
technically could lose support and could shut down. Right. So
Right.
the way to think about it is like when you start paying price points that are no longer sort of disposable income, but are like legit investments and money that someone really shouldn't lose. I think you do have to follow up and say, here is how you can get the peace of mind that you've basically bought what can actually become a digital artifact 50 years from now. And you'll actually have access to, you'll actually be able to do things with it. Right. So to me, it's like the first question isn't even blockchain. It's where do you feel most comfortable that the storage of your digital asset or digital collectible can live for the longest period of time, right? And in a lot of use cases, actually a blockchain is the best way to do it. But yeah, I think in terms of like FA in general, it's a double-edged sword, right? It makes the drop of the first brand, or it makes the first drop of that brand a big deal. But I just think that if the reason to buy this is too overweight on that, you're kind of like dogging the future stuff that you want to do, right? And then you start to wonder if that's the sole value. Like, you know, does it end once you've done the first appearance of every character in the universe? Like,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, exactly. At that point, are you only going to live in subsequent value after that, right? And I think that trend is like what we saw from like comic books or something. Again, when you have like first appearance of Superman, and then every subsequent comic book, maybe not Superman number one, but everyone like kind of had less and less value. But again, I think like we talked about, like there's just so many uncertainties. Like I love the point that you brought up about blockchain as well. There's smaller blockchains that they might go out of business, or they might have, maybe the data is locked up somewhere, but it's not going to be accessible or not really cared about by anybody.
Right.
And so this is where, like, again, it's just there's so many competing things happening right now, and this is why I love when people are just like, collect what you love, man.
Yeah, dude, I feel like someone stole our tagline from like 2016. Like,
Yeah.
literally go on like the Wayback Machine. There's literally really terrible versions of an old Quid website from like 2016 that's like literally collect what you love. Like I had that in my email signature in 2016, but I'm like trying to get deals done, right? Like so it's encouraging to see the industry and the community kind of like sort of float back to that, right? Because when it gets too overly heated, it's almost like you can like have a crash, right? But if you float back to some underlying belief about the value of the objects, and it's based on like, hey man, like I love this, right? Like I just love Spider-Man. I just love the journey of collecting. I liked that I had to do deals with 5 different other collectors to like finally be able to get this one. Like the little story of how you hunted it down, like that's the value that is more sustaining than it just being the first drop. But the one thing I'll say maybe to the VeVe community is the collectible space is really big. There's a lot more than like collecting superheroes, a whole heck of a lot more. There is one space, call it sports, that has a benefit of having a rookie class every new season, right? Like a new Spider-Man isn't invented every new Marvel season, right? Or a new comic book hero isn't really invented every new season, but a new rookie star soccer player or baseball player is actually invented. And that's why sports collectibles are actually orders of magnitude bigger than pop culture collectibles. And I think the VeVe community might, I don't know, in terms of cross-pollinating, in terms of like diversifying, in terms of learning about new opportunities, maybe finding some new alpha, that is the one distinct characteristic of sports collectibles versus pop culture collectibles is sports have seasons. The seasons always bring new up-and-comers, and those up-and-comers always either perform well or don't perform well, and that can actually affect the value. So
I love that. Yeah, because like, if like perfectly said. I mean, I saw even like on Quid, you got like Manchester City right now. Like I was looking at like Haaland, or like even Mbappe, or like those guys 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago, weren't really known, and now they're superstars, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So imagine, collecting merchandise on them or digital collectibles of them, right? Yeah, I
Well,
hear you.
so before we did Quid, I was at Tops, and we did the earliest Star Wars digital collectibles actually,
Wow.
and that was in an app called Star Wars Card Trader. But while I was there, we also did a lot of early sort of experiments with digital trading cards with sports leagues, and that's kind of the one thing we learned is like those have a natural reset on an annual basis where a new season starts, players get transferred. I mean, Spider-Man doesn't get traded from Marvel to DC, right?
Right,
But
right, right.
actually can happen in the world of sports. And so you have a lot of these other interesting variables that kind of create a narrative around sports that don't exist in pop culture, where those variables make it kind of in some cases, a more fun collecting experience, right? You're not, let's say, speculating on, I mean, how do you speculate on an FA? It's like, it can be debated what's a real FA, but
Mhm.
not like you're debating like a timestamp in a database. That's pretty immutable. But with
Yeah.
sports, you can debate like maybe this player is going to be great, or like no, I think this player is overrated. Like he or she are going to flame out. There's no way that they're a Hall of Fame, contender. So the
Agreed.
rookie card isn't really worth what it is. So anyway, I think as your community, is beginning to sort of experiment with what else might be out there, the sports thing is really, it's compelling because it has a couple different like layers happening underneath the surface
Right.
that give you more interesting strategies on how to play the market. And I learned that at Tops, and that's kind of where like as the VeVe community kind of becomes bigger and bigger students of collectibles in general, you'll see that really stand out with sports. I mean, there's a reason why baseball cards have been collected for 75 years or whatever it is, right?
Yeah. No, that's so cool. I love that backstory because it's almost like establishing new IP in a sense, right? Like you're the one finding it, you're identifying it. And even though there's other NFT projects out there that are non-IP related, like it's a bit more of a gamble because you're completely just throwing your money into arbitrary, projects, hoping that, Steve Aoki or like
Yeah,
somebody's
right.
a part of it, right?
Right.
So
Well, I
that's
always look at
cool.
that. I'm like, is this guy a good DJ? Like, or not? Like, and like
Yeah.
with sports, you just have these other layers going on
Hmm.
that make it. I mean, if you're just searching out an FA, it's kind of like playing checkers, right? And it's kind
Right.
of as opposed to like playing chess. With some of the sports collectible spaces, there is a chess element because it's more strategic, because value can be derived based on the player's performance, as opposed to just this thing of like who wins the debate of whether it's first or not, right? Or who wins the debate of which blockchain matters.
Yeah.
So
Yeah. No, I love that, man. And what's your favorite collectibles and stuff that you have on Quid right now? Like, do you
yeah,
have a pretty significant collection on there, or are there things that,
I do.
yeah,
Our bread and butter is, we've had similar licenses, if not the exact same licenses as some that sort of VeVe has, right? We definitely skew more into pop culture, media, entertainment. Game of Thrones, Rick and Morty, lots of good animated properties. There's actually some of the earliest instances of anime on the platform and in digital collectible format ever,
right.
which is today off chain, but at any moment could be moved on chain if we make a big announcement. But my favorites are actually, I mean, I'm kind of a sports guy. You can probably tell by some of my answers.
Yeah,
You,
yeah, exactly.
you mentioned Erling Haaland.
Yeah,
He is, if you follow soccer, he and you follow the top leagues. Premier League is one of the top leagues. He's kind of like the young stud in that league, and he plays for one of the top two or three clubs in that division called Manchester City. And what's actually cool about it is like I'm interested in how he's scoring goals every weekend, to see if it
mm.
really lives up to the hype of how valuable his card is on.
Ah,
And so he's actually delivering. I think the dude leads the Premier League in goals, or if he isn't, he's like number two or number three. But I haven't been able to afford buying his like rookie card on Quid, but it's one that I'm eyeing because only 10 of them exist.
oh shit.
It's a cool looking like 3D card. It works in AR, and it's one of those things where I think it even predated anything that FIFA Ultimate Team did with him.
Wow.
So it's one of these where I'm kind of like, it's my like grail that I want. I can't afford it, but I'm also curious if it becomes like a hidden gem that eventually gets to.
Yeah.
So I don't own that one personally. I collect more weird stuff. Like I'm a fan of Bob's Burgers, the animated show, and so
I know that show. That's awesome.
I have a pretty good. Well, it's just like weird, and if you see some of the weird stuff we have in Quid, it's like I don't know, maybe it's PG-13 in terms of its like appropriateness, but we've definitely mined that show. We've mined Game of Thrones and produced some really interesting product. And I think it's actually worth jumping off and making some contrasts with VeVe that I think help bring to bear. Ultimately, it's complementary, right?
Mm-hmm.
We have 3D figures on Quid. We've got really classic old Funko digital collectibles in 3D format that don't exist anywhere else. But our bread and butter sort of is like the digital trading card, and we release them in sets. So it's not like pay $50 for one figure or pay $100 for one figure. It's much more blind purchase format, open packs, try to complete a set. So even the way people collect on Quid is different. The price points they pay is different. And kind of the mechanic of what they want to get. It's not about like what serial number did I get the minute after hitting the buy button on drop. It's actually more of a pursuit where you're going to want to hunt and play the marketplace to find certain things. So, a comparison to VeVe, it's like comparing like a McFarlane Toys, figure that you put on your shelf with baseball cards, right? They're not same, right? So I think that's probably something that the VeVe community might be interested in. Is it's not really competitive. It's a different type of collecting. It's got a different sort of alpha and different return potential.
Right.
It's a little bit less expensive to buy into. You don't have to mortgage your house to build a collection of like 25 figures. Like you can kind of get in and experiment. Just like, you can still buy baseball cards for like $5, right?
Right. You're playing on my heartstrings because I'm a soccer guy. My brother played semi-pro. I played, university. So, and I've always been, a fan of that kind of stuff. And, I wasn't really aware of like, I saw a lot of the trading cards, but I didn't know that you can get like such limited kind of edition grails. Right. So it's just, and you know what's nice about that is that there's so many times where if you miss the drop on VeVe, or now, a lot of people miss that drop on Superman, and and people just aren't as aware of all the other digital collectible opportunities out there that might even be better suited to what they want to collect. So that's why, this whole thing of people being isolated and like, I think we just all have to, maybe not yourself, but a lot of people on this end of things have to do a better job of just being more open to all these different, opportunities that exist, because it's not like one platform is going to win the day. Like there's going to be a ton of winners, just like you see in real life, right?
Yeah, and people will. I mean, we've seen some people prefer certain formats where it's like, I'm just a card collector. I just like cards, and other people like figural, things that maybe for them it's more about the showcase and the display, and on your shelf or whatever it might be. But it's still ultimately collecting at its core. It's still engaging with a community of like-minded people that probably are also fans of the same IP. It's fun to come together and like debate people, right? So this is why it's like maybe having a definitive answer on what FA and the blockchain means, or even if it's meaningful long-term, having that debate's actually really fun, right?
Yeah.
But yeah, I think that's an important note is like, the things you can collect digitally will probably be as varied as the things you can collect physically. And that was kind of always this work that we had about like, the first time the brand is on the blockchain. Well, if you go to the real world, you can get collectible products made of paper, made of plastic, some that are $1,000, some that are $10. I mean, there's a whole diversity of these things, and each touches a unique market, and really to each his own in terms of what the collectors value.
Love that. Well, listen, man, thank you so much for coming on today for, this great discussion. I'd love to have you back on. I know that, we didn't have as much time today, but I feel like we covered some really important topics. And, if you haven't checked out, Quid yet, everybody, make sure to go do it now. I left the link in the description below. If you're a sports fan, definitely check out some of those rookie training cards. I'm going to be checking out.
Don't. I don't want any that's my secret.
Yeah.
Don't do that.
Okay, never mind. Scratch that. No, but it's been a blast, and yeah, an honor to have you on. And like I know we've been trying to do this for a long time. So whenever there's something else coming up with Quid, like let me know, and I'd love to have you back on, man.
Yeah, no, we'll do. And thank you so much for having me. The one thing I'll say is like, I think I sold my first digital trading card like 10 years ago, back when I was at Tops. And it was a failure of imagination. I never imagined that a decade later, there would be I mean, the VeVe community is amazing. The work that you guys do as content creators is amazing. I never thought that there'd be this sort of level of support for it. And so it's just so encouraging to see. Because I do think from my perspective, it's less about NFT or digital collectible. It's just like this is collecting. And at some point in another 10 years, when someone talks about their collectibles, probably all of them will be digital, right? This is a format shift, right? And basically you and I are finding it's probably more fun to collect something digital than it is to collect something made of cardboard or plastic, right? So I think it's rewarding for me to be here because I can gauge it because I'm like ancient in the space, but I can gauge it on a long time horizon. And what you guys are doing is super important, and it's also way beyond what I ever expected it to be. So like, I love you guys, and like, thank you so much for making the great content that you make.
Amazing. Thanks so much for coming on again, man. And yeah, that was cool. And one thing I'll just add to is I love the fact that we're going there because it was only a year and a half ago that I really got into this space.
Yeah.
And I didn't think that we could, right? Like I thought I was like maybe being fanatical. But I was like, I saw the writing on the wall. It's like reduce storage, it can show you something in real time, all this stuff. So, appreciate, pioneers like yourself that have, saw this vision before anybody like myself even thought it was possible.
Well, and I think the other thing too that we miss in the NFT or digital collectible space, whether it's VeVe or Recur or Hero or Quid, is at the same moment physical collectibles are kind of having a renaissance, right? They equally went up, right? And I think it all just kind of conspires around this notion is that this is still going to be really big. It's still incredibly early, and my interest actually is less about these all become game pieces in a metaverse, although that's happening. It's also about getting someone who normally buys something made of cardboard, right, to now buy something digital, right? Or someone that buys something made of plastic. We can't lose sight of that community because that community is huge. They're true collectors, and we all got to work collectively, regardless of whatever company we work for, to try to get them to come in and sort of make that format shift from something made of paper and plastic to something that's made of code that is only digital, right? And like, oh god, there's just so much opportunity there. It truly is inning number one, and like, it's just been a pleasure to be here. So thank you.
Thank you, man. Yeah, like I said, I could talk to you all day, but yeah, no, that was great.
Next time, part two.
Yeah, exactly. Part two on the way. Thanks again, Mike.
You bet. Thank you.